Also, I wanted to ask about kind of broader theme about spirituality in the writing you do. There's a lot of authors who openly say that they're Catholic or they're atheist or they're Orthodox Russian something or another, and it seems to influence the way their stories are written. It's whether they believe in a god or not seems to influence the outcome of their stories a lot.
Oh yeah.
And I was wondering how you would define your own spirituality and whether that has any influence on the way characters' lives turn out in your books.
That's a big one. So when I was at an artist colony in Virginia, and I was working on the title story, A Wedding Song for Poorer People, and I realized that one of the characters was involved in a kind of spiritual crisis. And I remember typing away and typing that scene and realizing what was going on with this character that I didn't know about until I typed it. And I thought, oh no, how much more marginal can I make myself? I'm already identified with the American South. I'm a short story writer. I'm not a novelist. And now I'm a religious writer. Oh, oh no.
Are they a dying breed?
And, Roger's in a spiritual crisis too. He's in a crisis of conversion. And that I got very curious about this. He's in some ways out of the Calvinist tradition. And
can you explain a bit for people who aren't steeped into Christianity?
Calvinist. Well, Calvin, the Puritans. Okay, now I'm not going to get this right, but basically, there's a sense in Calvinism that hard work and good manners will kind of save you in some way. But there's also, in traditional Calvinism, there was a sense that you couldn't know if you were saved or not until you died. And it was all, predetermined. And so in colonial America, you had deeply religious people, the Puritans, actually committing suicide to find out whether or not they would be saved. So that's the kind of, it's a tough theology. And by contrast, Catholicism's pretty generous. You get a hand in your own salvation, you get confession, you get, all kinds of things that later on the Protestants kind of took issue with because you could, with all indulgences and things like that. But Rogers actually, he is a modernist, good old modernist. So, who in some ways, art became their religion. Art became a kind of religious experience and a religious expression. It was the way they, in a sense, worshipped or glorified whatever they were glorifying. And sometimes it was really ironic. But Roger's in this place where he's being very drawn to the Catholic Church in very interesting ways.
Why is he being drawn to? Is it through there's a woman he's painting who's dying, I guess, of cancer.
Mrs. Montoya.
Yeah.
So this is set in Taos, New Mexico, which is New Mexico is a very Catholic, a particular kind of Catholic state. It is, it's a very fierce kind of Catholicism that actually may be informed by Sephardic Jews who escaped the Spanish Inquisition and ended up in northern New Mexico and then pretended to convert. But there's, it's not like Irish lace kind of back in New England, kind of Catholicism. It's like, you have penitentes who are, beating each other and themselves and crucifying each other, and they take it very seriously. And the non-Catholic cannot help but be aware of that. George O'Keeffe, who I don't think by any stretch of the imagination would have ever considered himself a Catholic, was deeply touched by that spirit in her paintings and in the landscape and in the culture. You just can't not be. But how does it come upon Roger? I'm not quite sure. He talks a little bit about the poet Anne Sexton, who was a Protestant poet, who wrote this great poem called Protestant Easter, which ends about, what's the last line? Protestants sing because they're not sure. And she was had a lot of, spent a lot of time in mental hospitals and had a number of breakdowns and ended up committing suicide, and I think she was befriended at some point in her career by a Catholic priest who suggested that she look for God in her typewriter. So he pointed her back to work, which I think, which actually appears in the story. Roger thinks, that is a very good idea to point a Protestant back to work. But work is the thing that we really get. Yeah.
But in addition to, which kind of faith people believe in, do you think that whether or not the writer believes in God has any influence on, it feels like even though there's problems and there's all kind of dark things that happen to the characters in A Wedding Song for Poor People, there's kind of like a light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
It's not just a giant morass of tragedy at the end. Everybody comes out with some kind of, inspiration or some kind of forgiveness or something like that. And is that kind of informed by,
Oh, yeah.
News? Yeah.
Yes, I believe in redemption. Now how to handle that in a story is very tricky because it can't really, that can't be the only thing that's happening. It's got to come naturally. It's got to grow naturally out of the story. You can't make a story that is going to end up there. In other words, you can't have an agenda writing fiction. You just can't. And you know that.
Right.
You're feeling around in the dark, and it's the characters who tell you it. It wasn't my idea that Roger was going to have this religious conflict, or how it was kind of resolved. That absolutely surprised me.